Hi guys, this is Tom from the 100th Monkey Radio with John D. Riley. We're here in Santa Monica, California at his shop, I guess, his temple slash research center. And I happen to have the opportunity to stop by and take a look at the amazing stuff that you're working on and the products that you're putting out there that are, I've experienced Big Mama over there back at East City in 2010 and felt the energy that it puts out. And what is this technology exactly, John?
Well, I'm really glad you asking that, because the nice thing about you coming here, we can take you a little further down the rabbit hole,
right,
and actually show you higher potentials of what the technology is actually here for. So I think after we do the initial interview, you'll be able to go back and, after experiencing the technology once again a little deeper, you'll be able to explain that in a very profound way. So the LifeStream technology works with what we call radiant energy. And we give it that term to give credit to Nikola Tesla's due diligent research that he did over a century ago, especially with his research of radiant energy back in 1899 to about 1923. And Nikola Tesla understood further in the transmission of the understanding of energy is that there's an ethereal energy that is amongst us, and all we have to do is get to that conscious level within our capabilities and our technology to bring it forth. And what he was able to do is he was able to transmit energy wirelessly through the Earth and the ionosphere. And what that would do is, and from there, we would be able to accumulate this energy. Now, he did that from an energy standpoint, but he also took it further and realized that it had amazing health benefits. And when we were in this energy, all our wrongs would be righted. And there's actually some records showing that Mark Twain was a really big fan of him, and he would go over there and play in these energy fields that Nikola Tesla would create. And he made a platform that he would stand on. And he would say all your wrongs would be righted. And it was a high energy, radiant energy field that would emit from this platform. And you could not feel its effect. Without a doubt, you felt something was profoundly going on in you. You had millions of volts running through your body. And that's when we started to understand. In my research, I was able to realize that was one of the biggest missing dots in body and mind and spiritual balancing, is to regenerate these primary unified fields, which is radiant energy. And I use the term radiant because it's easier for people to understand, but then when we have the ability to understand the unified field, then it takes on a whole different understanding, because it's not one particular harmonic, it's all harmonic. It's very similar to a lightning storm. We don't have the technology or the instruments to be able to measure what frequency a bolt of lightning is, or a battery. Most people would just conclude that there is no frequency in a battery. But is there? When we understand it from the unified field principle, especially a lightning bolt, there's not one harmonic, or one frequency that resonates from a strike of lightning. It's all harmonics, and that's what keeps the balance, the dynamic of all life on this planet. So when we start to induce those fields forward, then something profound happens in the 70 trillion cells in our human body. We go into that unified state. We go into that center, or the 0 point. And this happens with 9 out of 10 people in the field. When you get in the field, all of a sudden you feel very present. And most people can't even think of a negative thought. And so this was, as an observer, this is something that I started to realize what was going on. So if you can't think negatively, you can barely drift out of the present moment. You become in the now. And that's the 0 point. That's a level of mastery that our mind and our body wants to be in. Because when we are present in the now and stay there constantly, that's when the magic happens within our body. Because we cannot be out of balance. Sickness cannot fester in someone who's in the present. So we have to be out of balance with our past or in anxiety with our future, to cause stress.
So I've got a picture in my mind right now of the way energy flows through the body, our natural energy without anything else going on. And I feel that I kind of picture that there is a directional flow that energy runs through the physiology, just physiologically, the way that the nerve impulses that are the neurons that shoot through the brain down to the different parts of the body to activate things. So there's a definite direction that everything flows in, and kind of what I picture, and I saw this in a meditation once when I was kind of contemplating the body energetics, and I kind of saw that flow of broken lines in that flow, and things that weren't connecting and weren't flowing, like blockages within the flow and stuff. So I guess what the question I'm asking is using this radiant energy, do you think that helps to align things back into alignment to help the flow, the natural flow, to a person be able to regain that natural flow?
Well, absolutely. When we start to understand the natural flow, almost everything is based on frequency. And a lot of the researchers over the years, they were working to isolate, to seek and destroy imbalanced cells in our body. Right. And in my research, I wanted to understand how do those cells transmute and to become a negative or a lower inverted cell that became cancerous or otherwise, just out of balance or out of harmony. So when I realized that there was so much research based on isolating the frequency of the cell and then counteracting that or eliminating it, right, I started realizing, I looked at that list and there were hundreds of frequencies. And in my higher consciousness, I realized the unified field was go and generate all frequencies, not just one or a dozen frequencies. Just create a lightning storm, an ethereal generator. And so that was the key, that was the basis. So what happens is that when we are introduced, and this is very similar to what the ancient Egyptians understood and other civilizations. They were able to focus this energy using ley lines and synchronic lines across the planet and focus that energy into what they call the holiest of holy chambers in the temples. And this is where amazing things would happen. And how we feel when we go into these chambers, even the 1% of the activity of the temples in Egypt, you feel profoundly different when you're in these temples. And so my research was trying to connect those dots to understand what they understood. So now with our level of consciousness and technology, we're able to bring these fields forth. Now, we're only generating what already exists, but we have to get to that level of consciousness to bring it forth. And that's when the magic happens. When we see the significant changes that happen in body and mind, we get into a state of homeostasis. We go back into that 0 point. We tap into that neutrality between the positive and the negative. And this is now, when this happens, the phenomenon that happens is that our bodies become sponges to this. It absorbs this energy like a sponge. And we can measure this because almost everybody goes through what we call the saturation effect for 10 to 15 minutes. And we'll put you in the field and we can measure that. And if I put the meter to your back, if the energy's, the generator's in front of you, we'll get a very low measurement to the back. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, after your body has saturated this energy, then you start to broadcast it. And then we put the meter and it's pegged. It's completely night and day. It's equal all the way around. So we can see that tangibly with our instrumentation, that the body absorbs it, and like a human battery charger, we get in this and it recharges our cell structure. So when we do that, now the body and the mind have energy that it hasn't had in a long time. And now in that conscious and the subconscious, it starts to utilize that energy to bring the body back into balance. So what we'll see over a natural respect, because we follow the laws, we do not induce healing crises. We created the energy fields to be in respect, to our accumulation. Right. And so it's a progressive technology. So this gets a little tricky to explain, to people because they think
best and highest good, right?
Right. So but when the subconscious understands that it has this portal energy or this ability to tap this energy field, and if you make a commitment to do it once a month, once a year, or daily, the body and the mind are going to know this. So when we can start utilizing that. So when we bring it into our home and bring it into our lives and use it like on a daily or a weekly basis, our subconscious always knows that it's going to tap that source again, recharge the batteries, and then the human cell batteries, and then utilize that to correct what has been imbalanced over a period of time. Because we build up accumulations in our body, and then we get to the crisis point, that's usually when it's revealed. So if we get into a higher state of consciousness, to realize, wow, all those thoughts, all that financial struggle that I've been carrying with me for the last 10, 15, 20 years is now compiled into my body. Because when I think of something out of balance, think of a bill, all of a sudden I feel tension in my neck and shoulders. Why is that? And this is the way we'll start to think. It's like, why am I choosing to do that? Why am I storing my thoughts in my physical form? That is an imbalance. That is not necessary. And so we just stop doing it. We get to the conscious realization that this isn't serving me. And we get to that point of becoming in the present moment. And that's when we realize when it doesn't compile, is when we are here in the now. And so when we think of a financial situation, our bodies don't react. Our blood pressure doesn't change. Our emotions doesn't change. But if we are out of balance, and if we have like a relationship out of balance, and we're talking, having the greatest time, and then I mention a person's name that you're out of balance with, we'll watch, just in that word, we'll send the spiral. And that spiral can only happen is when you're accessing imbalanced situations from the past, bringing them into your present, and disrupting your biofield. We'll see that instantaneously. It's really amazing to see. But then when we're in balance, when we're in the present moment, I hit that trigger. And I mention it once again, you're like,
whatever.
It's non-reactive. Exactly. It's non-reactive. It doesn't affect you the same way as it used to. And so that's when we start to realize, wow, something significant is going on in the body. And what happens is we have mind and body balance. And so what we choose to do in the mind, our body follows. And we know that term, where the mind goes, the body follows. And so when these two are in alignment, you live in the highest quality of life possible. Now, a lot of people ask me, is this a cure? I go, absolutely not. I said, but if you give the body the energy it needs, you bring homeostasis to the mind and body, you're going to live in the highest quality of life possible. And that's the key to the LifeStream technology.
So you talked about a maximum saturation point with the energy.
Yes.
Right? Is it like a muscle? Does the amount that you can absorb and the amount that you can hold increase through overusage?
Well, again, this is where it gets really delicate to explain this, is that because the subconscious and the consciousness are always in play. The precognizance, our intentions of where we're going to be tomorrow, where we're going to be a week from now. But one person, if they come in here and experience this, and then 3 months later they come back, the first time they're going to have a profound effect by it. And then their subconscious might call them back to it, especially if there's energy needed.
Right.
On top of that. And a lot of people say, wow, I just keep getting this craving to come back. I go, isn't that interesting? So your subconscious is sending you a message to get back into the energy. So, and that's almost like when we go on vacation. If you're working the 9-to-5 structure, you get those 2 weeks of vacation a year, you plan a trip to the Hawaiian Islands. After about 3 days, you finally detach from your old life, and you're in the moment. You've got a smile on your face, you're adventurous, you're swimming, you're tanning, you're running, you're doing whatever you want. And then it's time to go back. And then when we get back, usually within that first day of sitting behind that desk again, your subconscious is trying to get you back to that island. And that's why some people almost make the decision to quit their jobs and to say, this is not healthy to me. I'm going to go back to that island where I had a smile on my face. And what is going on there? Because the body and the mind knows what's, the least stressful environment. And it's naturally going to want that. We always want what's best for us. It's we program ourselves to think otherwise. And the person who doesn't quit that job says, well, I need to pay my bills. I need to just forget that. In another year, I'll go back. And we'll just fire ourselves out. So this is where it gets interesting, is when we bring this into our lives, and we have it on a daily basis, we sit in front of it, we just make it a protocol. Then the subconscious knows that we're making that commitment. And then it uses the energy on amazing levels to go into the deep process. And so, when people acquire the technologies to bring them in their homes, there's usually these phenomena that happen. The first one is the deepening phase, is where they're going into the deep cellular structure. And then usually within 4 to 6 weeks, they go into the questioning phase. Because this is something that happens once you are on this higher threshold within your physical body and your mind, you start going through the shift of consciousness. And if you're not preparing yourself for that, then it could be a rude awakening, because all of a sudden everything around you is taking a drastic change in your perception, and things are revealing themselves that weren't obvious to you or now are exposing themselves. And even maybe in your physical body, you start feeling different, or you're going through an elimination process. All of a sudden, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, your body wants to let go of things that you've been accumulating. And this is where it gets really interesting. So when I get those emails from people or those phone calls, I go, you're in the questioning page, you're questioning this technology at this point in time, aren't you? He goes, yeah, kind of, I am. I go, so now I'll just ask you, what do you think it's doing? And then I'll ask them, I said, what's happening around you are things that were, normal or are now being revealed, and you can see beyond that. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And it's very unpleasant. I go, well, we call those awakenings. Sometimes they can be profound, sometimes they can be rude, but an awakening nonetheless.
Right.
And so we have to, and I don't know what your illusion matrix around you is, what you've nestled yourself into to be comfortable or uncomfortable. And I call those comfortable comforts. Sometimes we're very uncomfortable, but we're comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time, but we're not uncomfortable enough to make a change.
Yeah, we're afraid of the truth because the truth's going to hurt.
Well, sometimes it can.
Yeah.
I know, it always does. It depends on how long you've been living in the illusion until it's revealed to you. Even when we use the references of the movie The Matrix, which is perfect, when they pulled Neo out, they said, we have rules to this. We don't take people from the Matrix after a certain age because they can't handle it.
Right.
They've been inured or they've been immersed in it so long, they fragment, they pop. And so they take a chance with Neo. He would run on that edge, So when we start to understand that, those rules apply. So, and this is where it gets very interesting. So that's the reason why we do it in a progressive fashion. No one walks out of here in this, in this broad altered state of consciousness and body, where all of a sudden everything's revealed to them on the outside, because that would be an unpleasant, integration. It would be too severe, and it would be a rough ride. So we've learned how to respect and honor the cellular and the references of time, how we accumulate energy, how we accumulate imbalances within, but we can expedite them on the way out. And we can use the time tense factor. If you've been accumulating something for 10 months, within a year you can eliminate that from your body. Now that's a question. Is that which I talk to people on many levels of.
So I think you meant 10 years.
If you've accumulated something in 10 years.
Okay, you said 10 months. You said 10 months. I want to make sure everybody knows that it's like, it doesn't take longer to get rid of the stuff.
That's true. It's a 10 to 1 factor. So if we've been accumulating an imbalance in our body for 10 years, we're using this energy, this technology, you can eliminate that imbalance within a year. So we have to ask ourselves, are you willing to make that commitment to have a higher quality of life within a year? So if someone can make that level of commitment, and we've seen people on profound levels of illness and lack of quality of life that were given like months to live, live several years, and to fight all that is because they made these commitments to make this shift in consciousness and then to find something that has an efficacy to make a difference, to sustain them. But we have to do this for all the right reasons.
Right,
this is where it gets very interesting. Right. So, the consciousness, these are consciousness tools. These are very high consciousness tools, and this is the most important thing to realize. And when we start using them, we go through that, that slow transition, to see what's truth, right? What's really around us.
So take me through a standard session that somebody would do at home. Say they got one of these the LifeStream generators. How's the program work for at home? So is it like do something they use during meditation, or is there?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we have 5 different models, and each one from the smallest to the largest denote levels of output, higher thresholds of energy fields. So the Model 100 is our smallest one, and it's actually the most popular because of its size and its efficacy. Because they look at it and go, how this little box could be so profound? How could it create that shift in my well-being? Why do I feel so good when I just sit in front of this little box? And I go, exactly. It's the energy field that it's generated. And that's where everything changes. So, and people travel all over the world with that technology, which is great. Our other models, we designed them for different uses. Like the Model 200 is twice the energy of the Model 100, and we designed that one for people that are physically challenged, that have a lot of blockages in their body and they're cellularly depleted. And so that one, creates a heavier saturation over a shorter period of time. And then we move up to we have the Model 300, the Model 500. The Model 500 is actually our latest design, and that's a combination of the 200 and the consciousness tower, the very tall one. And and this one works really well for people that are working on achieving high levels of meditation and yoga, doing yoga work. But we can also do what every one of these technologies does as well, besides just being in the energy, is that we have the ability to transfer this through touch. And hopefully in a few minutes I'll be able to demonstrate that on you, and you can actually feel that, how that's possible, because we won't have any wires, we won't be connected to anything. It's the etherical energy that we can receive and then send to others. And that's usually the one that's the game changer. That's where everyone realizes that it is a perfect technological interface with technology and humans. So we call it, technology interfacing, equipment, because it brings us together, the technology and the human aspect of what we're capable of. So, and then we have medical grade technologies as well. That actually we've been very honored that these have really been taken acknowledgement around the world. And we're building a couple right now. We're sending one to Guam, we're sending one to Italy, and we're sending one to France actually in the next couple of weeks. So we're really excited that the doctors, the alternative-minded doctors, have been really stepping up and realizing the efficacy of this technology.
Have you had much from the medical field here in the United States yet?
Well, it's kind of been interesting for us because we've been taking slow steps to find our ways in there. Mm-hmm. And I've been working on technologies to be able to introduce that. And again, none of these technologies are here to replace anything. They're here to accompany and to increase the well-being of people. So we have a technology that we're working with for cancer patients that go through chemotherapy and laser radiation, is that we want to add this to part of the protocol. And so after they go through these processes, they go into the LifeStream, and it helps the body, especially after chemotherapy, to regenerate 300 to 500% faster. Mm. And this is really amazing to watch. And any doctor that knows the standards of what chemo does to the body and how it strips the immune system, LifeStream has the ability to put it back very quickly. So people that go through those processes have a profound change, and the survival rate is increased. It's flipped. Instead of like 3 out of 10 survivors, it's 7 out of 10 in regards to the chemotherapy. So the body is not stripped and not recoverable, because again, a cellular structure dictates the level of recovery. Right. So if a person's really weak and then they go through the chemotherapy, sometimes the chances are very low that they'll survive that treatment. So using LifeStream, it increases your chances greatly, 300 to 500%.
So what's the area of effect for, I know, do they all basically cover the same area as far as the field that it creates at a certain frequency, or is it a contact?
Well, actually, it's not contact. The three models, the Model 100, the 200, and the 500, the Model 100, 200, and the 300, as you can see, they have a flat surface with a 90 degree, anywhere from 1 inch, 1.5 inches to 3 inches of 90 degrees. And what that does, that creates a toroidal fountain. And instead of where the column, here, when we turn it on, we create a toroidal donut. It'll emit an energy field. This one will emit an energy field about 25 feet in diameter. Mm. So 12 and a half feet, from the center to outside. So it would be about 25 feet. These units go out about 7 to 9 feet. But what they do is that they collapse on themselves, and they create a toroidal fountain. And we can take a detector, we can measure the field. It'll go up, it'll go out, and then it'll curl back in on itself. So the field stays sustained within a certain parameter. So the human or life interface, because animals love this technology, and that really, when we were working with a holistic vet, the intuitiveness of the animals, they would come right into the energy, not even question it. You know, you just turned it on and they were there, and they just lay right into it. You know, so we knew something was really interesting when we brought that forth. And so these technologies here, the 500 and the 400, because of the column, the antenna style creates a toroidal donut that keeps expanding. You know, so we do keep timers on them. You know, so the fields only generate out so far over a period of time, and then when they turn off, they collapse, and then you can start it up again, and then it'll have to build up again. So these are larger field units. You know, this one, and of course the Model 400, the consciousness, the 7-foot tall tower is the largest. It'll fill this entire room up, and we can have 50 to 70 people in here just all feeling really good.
But you can take it, like we did there at ESETI in 2010, you can transmit that person to person through a larger area.
Oh, yes. Yeah. When we get into higher levels of experimentation and research, we start realizing in this unified field that the LifeStream generates, every time we bring a human system into the field, or the 70 trillion cells in each human field, it amplifies the energy. And it keeps, you know, amplifying the energy every time you bring someone into the equation. So we do these energy hand circles where everyone holds hands, and then once we wait for about 10 or 15 minutes and get everyone charged up. And then I'll be holding the person, and I'll put my hand close to the LifeStream, the column, and people are feeling that surge. And they're like, how's that happening? I go, you're doing that. Your body is part of this. And the closer I get, all of a sudden they're feeling more and more energy, and it's rushing through the circle. And they're like, how is this possible? We're not connected to anything. I go, well, you are. You're all holding hands. We're all connected. And it just shows, it lets us show what the human body is truly capable of. You know, when we understand that we have over 70 trillion cells in the body, and each one has an electrical potential of 1.2 volts. If you can convert that energy over, you can power Las Vegas for 3 months. You know, when we understand how much energy is truly in the body. You know, and then what we generate on a daily basis, just the heat, the BTUs of heat, to the 25 and 30 watts of electrical energy that powers the brain. That'll light up a light bulb. You know, so we have to realize that there's more energy in the human system and around us than we realize. You know, in a long time, and now we're realizing that ancients understood this as well. And we knew how to tap that and utilize it, and to find balance or higher thresholds.
When we started here, you mentioned Nikola Tesla that had found some of the health benefits from these fields. That's something that, you know, I looked into Tesla when, 2007, 2008, I looked into him for a few months there and never ran across that.
You know, you have to really dig deep, to find all that information. And a lot of people know about the violet ray technology. You know, the little wands with the noble inert gases in the tubes, and that really got distorted over the years. And it was called that level of technology. By the time it was no longer acknowledged, it was called quack medicine. You know, because what happened is Nikola Tesla gave specific information, to these health-minded companies. And only 2 companies followed his specifics, and all the others started to reverse engineer, and because of parts, because of misunderstandings, replaced technology with other components that looked like it did the same thing, but it didn't. And when I went through the years and I started taking those violet ray technologies apart, from the ones that are current, that are used with state-of-the-art technology, to one all the way back in 1917. That had Tesla's name on it. And that's where the dots were really connected, because all the ones in between were a joke. They didn't do what the original box. It was the one in 1917 that when I took that apart, I saw the key component, that made it work and truly have the ability of what he proclaimed that it did. but it was not in any of the other technologies. No one understood it. They replaced it. They used transformers instead of this Tesla's vibrational transformer. It's kind of amazing, and if we do a little research on the vibrational transformer, it's pretty amazing what that does.
So is this back in the I guess it was the 20s, 30s, orgone was a big thing. Was it orgone?
Yeah. Well, Wilhelm Reich.
Wilhelm Reich. Yes.
Yeah.
Is this the same? Is this basically the same thing that we're dealing with here?
It is on the similar understanding. So when we have the ability to generate etherical energy, amplify what already exists around us, induce it, bring it forth. And Wilhelm Reich's work was pretty profound. What he was doing with the orgone boxes, when these, and he called, and most people don't understand where the term orgone comes from. And he lived in a town called Orgonite, or was it Orgonon, if I recall? It was one of those, Orgonon or Orgonite, and he called it Orgonon, to acknowledge where he discovered it. So it's kind of interesting is when we understand that. Of course, the ancients, the ancient civilizations they all had different names for it. What we call electricity today, the Egyptians didn't call it that, but they called it Sakim. The Sakim, which is the life force, and they saw everything as a life force. Technologies that emit an electromagnetic signature is a life force when we understand it, when we look at it. We emit an electromagnetic field, just like the technologies do. And so when we start to understand that, everything living generates an electromagnetic field. It's all measurable. Plants, animals, humans, all alike. It's a measurable energy field, so it's a life force field. So whatever term we call it, that's usually based on what is considered discovery, inventions, so and a lot of the man-made names get attached to it, so it's kind of interesting.
Well, anything else we need to cover on these before I get to experience the field myself?
I think we really covered it. It's just, one of the things that our global mission is to bring this level of energy back into the human awareness. Because one of the things that, one of the key factors, and a lot of people ask me, they go, well, how is this beneficial? And it's like, well, when we are induced on a constant daily basis of all the man-made or amplified frequencies, and most people don't understand of all the invisible fields that are hitting us, from radio waves to microwaves to the infrared and ultraviolets that are being generated naturally and by man. Man over 100 years ago realized how to take a frequency and amplify it 100,000 times past the subtle energy field, and that became radio waves. We've done particular frequencies. Now, and we've wired the world with alternating current of the wires for over 135 years. And so when we understand, that, the wires generate 60 hertz, 60 hertz of that tone, that frequency, that if I created it audibly, within 30 seconds, you'd ask me to turn it off, because it's very unpleasant. Right. So we've been in this cage for so long, and of course we've seen over high tension lines that people that lived under the high tension lines, the rates of cancer were exponential, and immediate, within a short period of time, people were having cancer, so they stopped putting homes under the high tension lines. So that's one way of resolving it, but all you're just doing is you're just avoiding, the hot spots. But then we start to have to realize that the wires and the frequencies around us create imbalances in the human body. And over time, if we're not consciously aware of that, we'll add wear and imbalances, which will start creating crises in the bodies, and we'll start getting diagnosed, and we'll be labeled with these sicknesses. So when we replenish the body, put the body back into this energy field, it finds balance, it revitalizes itself in the body and the mind. Thus, what happens is cellular permeation is reduced drastically. And what we mean by cellular permeation is that the outside fields, once the body weakens, the human cells cannot fend and keep up its field, to reflect or neutralize the outside energy field. So if you go into a high level of energy emissions that are imbalanced, your body will absorb that. And then the cells are trying to recover. So when we start using technologies like this, we recharge that. And our chi energy, or our life force, is amplified. And so what happens is the permeating fields are neutralized before they enter the cell walls because of our own human field. And so we almost call that a defense field or force field.
Right, or shield. Shields the maximum value. Yeah, so
exactly.
I know that Europe uses 50 hertz.
Yes.
Most of the rest of the world uses 50 hertz.
It's actually a little more pleasant.
Yeah, that's what I understand, is that it's not quite as noxious.
Yes, and since the 60s, the military, they've been using 400 hertz in the top secret projects, the advanced aircraft, and they realized back in the 60s that the higher frequency energy is more efficient, and it's very precise. And when I worked at Lockheed, back in the 70s, early 80s, having a top secret clearance, I was able to start connecting those dots about frequency. And I realized that the higher frequency that we generate, the more in alignment it is with everything around us. And so that was the key. And that stuck with me for a long time until I got into alternative energy and started bringing these technologies forth.
Speaking of alternative energy, do you think we're getting close with something as far as being able to see something available to the public that is, allows people to get off the grid, so to say, that energy independence? Do you think that's in our near future?
Well, one of the things that we're noticing is it's hard for the current infrastructures to be replaced. When we look at solar, utilizing ways of harnessing solar energy to replace the supply and demand that our natural grids have been generating. One of the things that is happening in our consciousness is individualism, where we're all going to be having these individual boxes that generate energy. Or, when we understand to go off the grid, we have the ability to do that now with solar or wind. But it's the kind of the first level of realization, and that does take us off the wires. And one of the things that when we're working to shift the paradigm is to realize that we can't do that in an immediacy because we can cause more harm than good. And I know everybody wants it, and they talk about free energy. I keep saying there's no such thing as free energy. Now, off the grid energy does exist. Alternative energy does exist, but free energy, to capture another source, you still have to create an infrastructure to do so. And a lot of people say Nikola Tesla was going to give the world free energy back in the 20s with Wardenclyffe, the tower he was making. And it's like, well, understand, he wanted to give it freely to the world, but it still had to be turned on, and it still had to be generated, and it still had to be maintained. So that free energy term is kind of gotten distorted over time. And realize him and J.P. Morgan were investing into this infrastructure. J.P. Morgan didn't realize that he was investing in a wireless energy generator. He realized that he was under the impression that Nikola Tesla told him that he was building a wireless radio transmitter. But he was using the funds to further his research.
Yeah, I think something like that anybody tried to roll out on a mass scale, they have a rental for the antennas or whatever. At this point and stage of the game, I don't see that happening very, very easily. It would definitely not be a smooth transition. But I think the trickle down or the trickle up effect is kind of the way I see things rolling out. You're going to see these people out in the woods that are coming up with things, or we know some people that over in Australia that are really, from what I understand, they're getting pretty damn close to having something, a small package that you can hook up to your house and take care of the whole thing.
The technology exists. There's many ways of doing this. And one of the things that when we look at it from an individual standpoint, is what do I need to generate my necessities of energy. Now here's the rub, is when we look at utilizing alternative energies, and this is where it gets really difficult for most people to understand, is that we have been converting energy for so long into a certain standard. And even when we take solar energy and we take the photovoltaic reaction that creates low voltage, 6, 12, 24 volts, whatever your array is, to utilize it in your home, you have to step it up. Right? You have to use an inverter and step it up to 120 volts at 60 hertz, or 240 at 60 hertz, or 50 hertz. Now, this is where tremendous loss is, because we've been stuck to that standard for so long. And I was questioning that standard back in 1979. It's like, why are we still on this standard? And so, well, because no one's going to change that. That's just the way the wires are around the world. And this is where, and we can see that the wires have been around the world for 135 years almost, and it hasn't changed at all. So, it doesn't matter how the power is generated, nuclear, to geothermal, to multiple ways of generating it, it's still creating the same energy output, which is polyphase alternating current that was discovered back in the 1880s. And then powered it. The first one was Niagara Falls. It was a hydrodynamic. So there was no energy in. It was using the power of Mother Nature. And that's Niagara Falls. So nuclear doesn't do it that same way. So any of the other ways that we're doing it, we're using energy in to get energy out instead of using natural sources. Right. So this is the rub, that we're up against. And most technologies that we own, about 85% of the technologies in our home has to take power supplies and convert them over to clean DC energy. Because our computers cannot run on DC. There's a power supply in there that takes all that noise and hum and cleans it up to 5 volts, 12 volts, 24 volts, DC. Right. So and the natural state of energy in the world is DC, is direct current, the energy in the battery. We are DC. Nothing in nature generates alternating current. Man created that. So this is where it gets really interesting when we start shifting our awareness. And I do this when people watch these videos, they're going, I didn't realize that. And I do this in lectures, and people sometimes can have a headache. But also, all of a sudden, we're just connecting the dots of the realization. And so then we can come together in a conscious collective and work to shift the paradigm, to create a monumental technology that will allow us to transcend the old ways and to fling us forward on such higher levels. That is happening as we speak. There's some amazing technologies on the individual aspect, because I'll tell you, there's not too many people that are working on too many structures that replace a nuclear generator, a nuclear reactor, that will create, like 100,000 terawatts of energy. It's just, that's too big of a scope. So the individual one is easy. The individual devices are a lot easier, to power each home directly. So that's coming. But the first, we're going to see great changes in our technology is that we'll see interface boxes. And we're working with people that actually, you can take a black box and you hook it to your home and you hook the grid to the box. Right. And energy in, you save 60% energy out to your home. So you use the grid to start it, but it'll optimize the energy from the grid and make it 60%, 70% more efficient. So most people will be very open-minded to that, and then we can advance that. And what are we doing? If we can implement that level of technology, we reduce grid consumption by 80% in 7 years to 10 years.
I see some other stuff happening up locally where I'm at up in Washington State. And actually, a couple of guys that I work with, they've got some cabins way back up in the woods, hunting cabins type thing. And they're running solar panels, and they're doing all 12 volt. Everything 12 volt.
Yes.
And there's some amazing lighting coming out in 12 volt. The LED technology has grown leaps and bounds in the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
Oh my word! I mean, you can't tell the difference between a 110 volt, 100 watt bulb and an array of LED lights.
Absolutely.
It's a hell of a lot better than that spiral fluorescent bulb they're putting.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
Ultra mercury, you know.
what I'm looking at is like within another 20 years, children will never understand what a filament bulb was.
Right.
The old vacuum, using a filament in a vacuum. It is crude. What is it? A regular light bulb is a controlled short.
Right.
And that's one of the things is that we have to realize it's not the most efficient. LEDs are as efficient as you could ever get. Right. As efficient because it generates, from a natural material reaction. When you're using gallium arsenide or you're using different elements, that creates a spectrum of light. And it's amazing. In another 5 years, that technology is just it'll replace everything.
Yeah.
And the consumption, it's a fraction of and even CFLs, and it's better for us. And one of the things that, when the first level of LEDs, when they came out, they didn't do too well. Why? Is because they were, when you would create a series of LEDs and plug them into alternating current, you'd see the 60 hertz pulse. So they were not pleasant to look at. So now, they're creating sophisticated circuitry to do the same thing, to eliminate that hum, that buzz, that oscillation, and to filter that out. So now it's a stable frequency that the brain and the eyes can be in balance with. DC lighting or DC batteries doesn't have that pulse. So it's natural. Everything's in balance. So this is where it gets great. So 12 volt lighting has been around forever. But 12 volt LED. But now we're at the point where LEDs run at 3 volts. When we get to when we break what we already did, where we broke the 1.5 volt barrier of efficiency in our technology, and 1.5 volts is human power and earth power. And most people don't realize that your natural energy that's measurable in the earth is 1.2 to 1.5 volts. Most people don't realize that an electrochemical reaction in a battery is 1.2 to 1.5 volts. And how do we get 12 volts? We series cells together. And they're all 1.5 volts series together because of the electrochemical reaction. It's a natural state of energy. And that's like that in all of nature. It's kind of really interesting when we realize that. So now our sophistication is getting us to the point where we can almost plug into the earth and power our devices. Or into our bodies.
We're getting close.
Scary.
We're getting close.
It is. Oh, yeah. Very, very quick.
Really exciting time to be alive on planet Earth. I mean, with all the different things happening, technology-wise, consciousness is just, things are just going through the roof since, say 2008, 2009. It's just skyrocketed. The number of people, the depth of understanding, things like what you're doing, where people are using that sacred science, the life sciences, where they're melding the technology with sustainable and balanced life force. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah.
Be able to witness it.
We're in such an accelerated time, and when we can see the measurement of frequency increasing on the planet, and that's the hardest thing for people to realize, that we can choose a frequency to live in. If you're in stress, if you're in anger, if you're in fear, you're in the lower frequencies of measurement in the human aspect. If you're in abundance and humanitarian, you're moving on the higher levels in your vibrational energy. And so we're getting to that point of realizing that these are measurable fields. When I do my research in Egypt, I was noting that the energy was increasing on a year basis. I went there six times in 5 years, noticing the increase. And just before the revolution, I did a video in November And I said, the frequency of Egypt is increasing past the point of fear. And people will not be able to sustain the fear much longer. And they're going to awaken. And this is going to be a huge shift in consciousness. And it's going to happen planetarily when it happens here. So to see that happen, I was just joy.
Right.
People were, that friends of ours that were trapped in the chaos of that moment, of that shift. Of course, it wasn't pleasant for them, but we were looking, this is the start. When there's an awakening, there has to be a dismantling of the old governing structures that no longer serve. And it has to break apart, and in that moment, it's very chaotic. But that shift in consciousness, that shift in the new paradigm is already reassembling itself.
Right. While
everything's broken apart, it's already in the grand design to reform. And so we just have to see that, knowing that this has to happen for this to happen. And now we're seeing it. We're seeing the significant changes. I was in Tahrir Square in December, last year. I did a video just to show people, what the news was saying. Boy, this is what's really happening.
Right. It's coming here soon.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's here already. Just yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
It's
the Western world
changes upon us, right?
Well, when we understand, there's so many prophecies, especially from India, and that's one of the most sacred kept, for thousands of years. The sacredness of the knowledge that they've been holding on to has been preserved for thousands of years. Not like Egypt, where it's all been broken apart and buried. It's still in its pure state out there. And when you go into some of these deep sacred areas, it's amazing the knowledge that has already been prophesied and proclaimed about the West and how the shift is going to happen here in the West and how the consciousness is going to happen because of the influence of the West and what we're going through. Because we have to realize that we're given an incredible opportunity. And when my daughter was kind of struggling in religious beliefs, and I took her on a very short tour of Santa Monica. I go, here, let's just take a little drive. I said, on this corner is a Baptist church. On this corner is a Christian church. On this corner is a Jewish temple. I just get going. I said, do you realize that you have religious freedom here? Where other countries, it's not so.
Right.
You will not see this very easily in any other country. So you're allowed to explore all the different religions and beliefs. And imagine if you do take that course and then you start finding the common denominator, what really resonates with you in these beliefs, which is something I did, at a very early age. And that's when I chose to become a seeker of origin. And most people are like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, I have to go to the origin of us, and I will not stop until the origin is revealed to me. And they said, well, where does that lead you? I said, that hasn't happened yet, but the journey has been pretty amazing so far, and the dots that we're able to connect, and the understandings of the beliefs on the planet, and moving through a lot of the distortions that have been broken down over the years, and seeing the common essences, and the origin, knowledge that is buried in all of them. And we have to, go deep to find it. But we're finding it. And when we realize that we have that ability to bridge, from the Western influence, from the Western consciousness, it's going to be really powerful what's going to happen on the rest of the planet. But already it's happening.
Right. All right. Well, shall we go plug me in? And
let's take it to the next step. Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. Well, this is our Model 400. We call this the consciousness technology, and this is the large field generator. Now, the uniqueness about this particular one is that I designed this one at a particular height so I can put crystals on it, and then we can combine that. So when the crystals are in the energy, they amplify and they radiate the energy. So when I turn this on, you'll be able to see that, because when I move my hand close, you'll hear it change and oscillate. So if I gave you this and had you hold it in your hand and walk up, it'll start singing in your hand. Mm-hmm. So with nothing connected to it. So that gives us a bigger understanding of the etherically binding energy. Not just if it's on it, it just has to be close to it, and the crystals start to sing. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to the hands-on transfer, where we're able to transfer this energy through touch when we're in the field. So if you can you easily take your shoes off?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can do that really quick, I'm going to turn it on. And now you can go ahead and stand on the plate. Now you can hear the energy coming from this, and the reason why this one generates that tone is because of the crystals. Now watch what happens when I put my hand next to it.
Oh, yeah.
See how it's oscillating?
Right.
So it senses us as well as responds to us. So now you go ahead and take your finger and just touch the top of the selenite, you can feel the energy coming off of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So and this is just a piece of selenite, and it's just sitting on here. So there's no wires to it.
Right.
And you can see when I move it away, and then when I put it back on,
Right.
how it amplifies. So the combination of the quartz and the selenite is a very unique frequency. So now when we come near the technology, you can actually go ahead and touch it, and you'll actually see the violet. We can do a close-up of the camera so you can see that later. But that's the violet energy that's coming off, and when you touch that, you're generating negative ions. Go ahead and smell your fingers real quick.
Oh,
Smell like a
yeah.
lightning storm?
Yeah. It feels like it's going from me to the. I'm seeing it's almost like I'm seeing a flow going towards the unit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're creating a loop. You know, when you talk about that energy flow, it's continuous. It goes both ways. You know, so yeah, the coronal is kind of fun to see. I know the camera from that distance won't pick it up, but well, good. Now just go ahead and hold your hands out. I just want to show you when I go ahead and I put my finger here. I'm just going to raise my hand up here and tell me when you start feeling the energy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So look where my hand is on here.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So we can direct this through touch. I mean, once we establish that, then we can start guiding this energy.
Wow.
And so now what we're doing here is that we start intuitively, how I discovered this is I was just guided from my higher consciousness to realize where to send this energy. And so what I realized is what I was doing is I'm putting the energy on a meridian. Each finger has a meridian that runs through the body. And this is our grid system. So what we usually do is we just start and we send this energy for about 5 to 10 seconds in each point on each finger. And sometimes you'll feel greater feedback in one and effortlessness in the other. So it all depends on where the blocks are. Now, all I remind people when you feel the energy is to breathe deep and slow. You know, so sometimes it's very easy to not be aware of your breath. And so, we just run through that. And again, we don't really even have to, touch the technology. The closer I get, the more intense the energy becomes. And then we can do reflexology points where we can turn it up and really start sending deep energy into the body.
Oh, yeah.
And without a doubt, you're feeling that, yes?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so this is the understanding of acupuncture and acupressure is that when we guide and send energy into particular points of the body, especially in the meridians, the meridian understanding, this really gave us a really clear understanding of what acupuncture is working to achieve in the body, right. And that's using the needles as antennas to amplify the subtle energy field, to get more energy into the networks or into the meridian lines of the body to open up blocked pathways. And we can do this through the touch as well. So when acupuncturists combine these technologies, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a whole, the acupuncture sites probably correspond to the same workings with this?
Pretty much, yeah. So it all follows the same energetic understanding.
Right.
All right, great. So, just after doing those 12 points, how do you feel in your body?
Actually, I still feel the energy flowing through me. My hands, both my hands feel like they're just tarped up.
Yeah, tingly.
Yeah. All tingly.
That's good. You got all that energy movement. Now remember, each meridian runs through your body, and the natural path to energy is to the earth. So those pathways are opening and going to, through your feet into the earth. So that is our earthing. That's the reason why you just stand there, feel very in your body. Mm-hmm. Most people do that. Now, if I ask you the question, can you think of a negative thought?
That's amazing.
It's not easy, is it?
It isn't.
It really
isn't.
Most people just do what you did. They just start to laugh.
That actually is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's almost hard to just think about anything besides this moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It
does put you right in the now, doesn't it?
It drops you right here. And that's what we understand. And that can only happen in the unified principles.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we knew we were generating a pure energy stream. It was not harmonics. It was to achieve just the pure energy state. And amplify what already exists on the planet. So now this is where it becomes really fun. Now one of the things is that we can get into the deep work of our accumulations, because everyone physically holds on to energy in their body. If I mentioned finances, or bills and all that, people's neck and shoulders get tight. If we talk about relationships, if they're out of balance, it usually happens down here. So we have various places where we hold our energy. So what we can do is we can take it, and I can go into accumulation, area here where a lot of people hold a lot of stuff right in these primary areas. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start sending energy, and you just relax. And tell me when you start feeling that very unique feeling. So now there's 120 muscles that turn their head, and the common person uses about 30 to 35 of them. Believe it or not, we shut down so many of them because of at an early age energy accumulation. So now you can see I'm holding on to a particular point. Now when I apply the energy, you can see how that affects your physical body.
Right.
And now you're feeling that twist and that movement.
Right. Oh yeah.
And so what that's showing us is showing repetitive programming of blocked energy or stored energy that really shouldn't be there. And I don't have to say anything when we do this work. All I have to do is be silent, just have the person breathe, and they start feeling exactly what's going on in their body. And this is where it's really amazing. This is the reason why we do this standing up. People are completely aware when they do this, and they probably have a little bit more reaction on this side. The right side usually more dominant on people.
Oh yeah.
And so what this is doing is this is showing areas that we accumulate energy. Of course, most people, and this affects the back, the lower back. So when we have all this energy, tense here, it tightens up, with the muscle structures. And so of course the first thing that usually gets weakened are the vertebrae, because we're not loose, we're not open and flowing as high as we can. And when I have yoga teachers come in that are really masterful at what they do, and I have them do a complex move before we do the energy, and they go, this is as far as I can go. And then I'll do a full hands-on session like I'm doing on you. I'll go through their spine, go through the sacrum, go through the neck and shoulders, and then have them do that move, and they're usually able to achieve 30 to 40% further than they ever have.
Wow.
And they go, I've never been able to do this before. And so they can, without a doubt, they can tell the difference. So when we get, more movement in the body, that's a really good sign. And it's real minimal for us to do this. So just go ahead and breathe and slowly turn your head to your left. And what we'll do is we're just going to engage. Keep turning your head to your left. Just try to explain what you're feeling right now.
Well, I'm actually feeling as the different spots you get, I am feeling the energy running in completely different channels every time you move to another spot. And it's not unpleasant. It's not unpleasant, but it's I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe.
Yeah. Well, the first experience is most people say it's the most unique thing they've ever experienced.
Oh yeah.
And so it's hard to be in words at first what's happening. When people come back a second, a third, a fourth time, you're doing this at home, you become very intuitive as to what's going on. And then you realize, oh wow, that's a block, and that's exactly where I've been holding my stuff. And then, that communication, when we realize that, that's when it releases. And that's when we can consciously realize that I'm storing, energy in the body that is not necessary because of my thoughts, my imbalances, because of finances or emotions or relationships. And we just say, let's stop doing that. And when we do that, then the energy releases. And what happens is we go back into the homeostasis, we go back into balance. So just kind of move your neck and shoulders, see if you feel a little bit loose in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Usually after doing that, people's brains readjust because we're deprogramming the patterning within the muscles. and the body drops back into homeostasis. So, people that really have bad posture after doing hands-on, they're standing up taller, and it's kind of amazing, but that balance, that clarity that usually comes with it. Some people get very euphoric, but most people are standing there very grounded, very open.
So I've used a TENS unit before. You're familiar with those?
Yes.
They shock the muscle.
Yes.
Stimulate the muscle. While you were doing it, I really, in particular, noticed it over here. That's when the comparison came into my mind. It's like, this is sort of tensing muscle, but it's not like the TENS unit at all. It's not. The TENS is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
This is not uncomfortable at all. It almost feels right.
Well, that's one of the things is that when all of a sudden when we're feeling that energy, we realize where it's coming from.
Right.
It's coming through human touch.
Through, right.
And we're interfacing between the technology, the energy field, and human interaction. So we are the most highly tuned, calibrated instrument there is. Our intuitiveness, our cellular capabilities, and then when we amplify that field, we can guide that energy. And our intuition becomes involved in this. And that's where it gets really amazing. We start doing simple protocols. When I certify people to do the hands-on, some people just, without hesitation can do this effortlessly, just like I did. It was like an instinct that just turned on when the energy was brought forth. I realized I was supposed to touch people and send this energy, and that's how it came. But then the intuitiveness, all of a sudden we can start seeing. We see the energy field, we see where people are holding trapped energy. And when I do this, it shows all the time. I go, let me help you with that accumulation area. They go, well, how did you know? That's my spot. I go, that's what I just see it. And I just want to give it to you as a gift and release it. And we have some amazing things happen when people understand what's going on. A lot of people have a tendency to call them miracles because they see profound shifts in people. When I went to Japan and did the humanitarian project, which I know you were involved with and you knew when I was doing this, is that I was working with one gentleman who traveled the world to get this locked shoulder problem. And I worked with him for 30 minutes. And he was able to, he had full range again. And he says, 4 years I've been traveling the world, to get this. And you come and you get rid of it in 30 minutes.
Wow. And
I said, well, it's the understanding of getting rid of that, that repetitive motion, the accumulation, the reprogramming. And what we're doing is we're putting homeostasis back in the brain and body. Because when we send that energy, the brain has no choice but to run a diagnostic of what's going on. So the TENS unit, remember, it's operator as well. It has to, choose the amplification and the duration and intensity. So it's still a machine trying to mimic this, but now intuitively we can do this.
This is some amazing stuff. I experienced it in the group setting there at setting.
Yes.
Night and day, what you just did there compared to what I felt at setting. I felt the energy flow at setting, and I was in just a completely different state during that whole week there. So I couldn't really give this the credit due, but that's amazing, absolutely amazing. So,
well, it's really when we get to this higher level of what's coming. And that's, this introduction of this technology, but also the interfacing, because so many people see the potential, of what, once this is acknowledged, how this can change, just the way that our quality of life is that very similar to massage, but on a higher, profound level of balance.
Right.
So a lot of massage therapists, want, to be certified to do this work, and we do. We have about 100 people out there that are certified by us over the years that are all over the world that do the hands-on work. And our goal is to shift that, is to exponentially increase that awareness of the technology and to bring larger fields, larger capabilities of the technologies forward. The good thing about it is that we're using one of the largest technologies. You can do the exact same thing with the smallest unit. You do the hands-on the exact same way.
Right.
And a lot of people are just blown away that that little box will do the same thing. That's the reason why it's so popular, because of what it's capable of in a very small size.
Well, I'm very impressed.
Great.
I wasn't exactly sure what to expect out of it. And because Ramon told me, he said, said, John worked on my shoulder over there, and he said it was absolutely amazing, and it hadn't felt that good in years. And I was like, okay, okay, Ramon. I was just totally not expecting what I just experienced. So fantastic.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Thanks, John. Good. Hey, you're going to do really good with this. I think as more and more people hear about this and learn about what's going on, and get some more impassioned people that tell other people about it. Wow, this stuff is amazing. You can't believe what can happen, what can be done with this technology. The combination of life, intention, and a piece of technology to help balance things out. I think we can do a lot of good things.
That's the goal. I had to move my ego gracefully off to the side and understand patience and create a center like this for that time when the conscious ones have the ability to come together, realize what is upon us, how it can shift us to the next level. And so my pursuit was not to be about money, to be humanitarian, was to be in service until that time where it's seen and the timing allows it to move exponentially, just like these technologies that are being discovered now. This is on the similar level. So maybe this video will be one of those broad outreaches where people will see it, realize it, want to come and then have it and be one of the pieces of the puzzle to bring it forward.
Right. So we're in Santa Monica. You want to give out your address or phone number or anything to so people can get a hold of you if they see this?
Well, if anyone's interested, they can visit our website, which is zeropointresearch.com. That's ZEROPOINT research.com. And from there, they can contact us. They can look at the videos. Maybe we'll have this up there by that time, and that'd be great. And then if they want to, they can plan to visit the Santa Monica, or if they're not local, we do have technologies all over the world that we strive to have an open door policy, that people can go and experience that.
Great.
So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you.